This is an overview and unboxing of a game called, pardon my pronunciation, Wir Sind Das Volk, which stands for, or which means We Are the People. This is a two-player game that takes place in a divided Germany post-World War II, and it's a two-player only game, as I mentioned, ages 12 and up, and estimated at 150 minutes. So let's take a close look here. Have a number of wooden cubes, which we'll take a closer look at. Cards. This is a card-driven game. The instructions. You have English on this side and German on this side, and they meet in the middle. This was a little errata sheet. All this is on the English side, they did not translate these icons, so it's meant to stand in for that, but that's not really a problem. The instructions are very good. They're full color. And that's it. You have some notes about some cards. You have some design notes. So really it's just this portion here to teach the game. And then let's take a look at... See, we'll look at the board in 1 second. And then we've got these punch outs here. Just like that. Essentially, anything that is yellow represents West Germany, and anything that's red represents East Germany, East Berlin, West Berlin as well. I guess we should have them this orientation here. But we'll take a closer look at some of these here as well. Actually, we can kind of see them here. There are factories represented by these triangles here. There's obviously the east ones here. I'm sorry, the west ones here and the east ones here. They have certain output capabilities that you twirl up to have the numbers face in a certain direction. Well, I'll show you what that means in a sec. On the east side, you also have factories that can become run down, and there's sort of this broken gear icon here. And then there are these pieces here. These are all these rectangular pieces, and they're double-sided, so they're red on one side and they're all yellow and on the other. So they're interchangeable, but those are infrastructure, and you use those to connect factories in order to increase their output. But whenever there's building going on, you're either building a factory or building infrastructure, and that's kind of what those represent. There are some markers that go on the board, which we'll take a look at. And then probably the thing that stands out the most are these protest signs here. Whenever there's a certain number of unrest in territories, and unrest is represented by these blue cubes, whenever there's 4 or more, or rather in multiples of 4, you place one of these protest signs, and you cannot build in a territory that has a protest sign. So that's kind of what that's all about. These purple triangles represent factories that are available only to the East Germany, and that represents some support from Poland and Czechoslovakia. So let's take a look at the board. Actually, before I zoom out so that we can see the larger board, I just want to show that it's actually finished on the back side, even though it doesn't have to be, but it has this sort of detail of like a concrete wall. I just thought it was kind of a nice touch. They certainly didn't have to do this, but it just seems to, I don't know, it just kind of adds to the production value and the theme as well. But yeah, you've got this demarcation line here, the border between east and west. Berlin is kind of a special situation. It's a special city that is represented by this detail here. And you see that there are 3 territories in West Berlin, but only 1 here in the east. These 3 territories are supported, or can be supported, with the standard of living tokens from these provinces here. You see the American one is off screen here. Yeah. So you've got these 3 territories that can support standard of living in these areas here. We are going to be tracking a number of things, including prestige. This helps determine who is the acting player in several circumstances, including at the end of each decade when there's a check to see what the current state of things and whether or not there's a winner or not. If it's on this side here, the prestige or initiative, if you will, goes to the west, and if it's in this direction, it goes to the east. I mean, it's pretty intuitive, kind of what direction things are going in. This track here represents a Western currency track, which is only relevant for East Germany, as is this one here. And this one here has to do with the generation of Western currency in order to support the infrastructure of the provinces. This one here is a socialism track, and there are pink cubes that are in here, a few pink cubes, as you can see. And the number of pink cubes available to the East German side is determined by this track here. So you can either increase pink cubes, or these pink cubes here are X'd out, and you can decrease it. And the pink cubes are one of the win conditions. If the East were to get pink cubes, but there were no more to provide because they were all on the board, that would be a victory for socialism, a victory for the East. If, on the other hand, pink cubes had to come off and there were none on the board to take off, that would be the opposite. That would be victory for the West. That would be the failure of socialism. So that's just one of the win conditions. There are a couple. So a factory can be put into a city, and its output is a default of 1, pointing to the north. And if you are able to connect a couple of factories like so, then they twirl up and both of their outputs increase. And then this output here in each of these territories will help determine whether or not you can raise the standard of living, which is one of the other metrics in the game, and it's represented by these, let me take it out here, these markers here, which are, what are they? They're octagons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, octagons. So this is a standard of living marker. It's the same color for either side. These are the Unrest Markers. And the game starts with 3 in every territory. If you ever get a 4th one, then you must put a mass protest marker in that territory. And you can no longer, there's a German side and an English side, you can no longer build in that area until you deal with this, and you deal with it by reducing these tokens and so on. Same thing happens over on the east side, but one thing that happens is that there's a pool of pink socialist cubes that if you ever need to add protest, as long as you have, or unrest, as long as you have pink tokens, you can add those instead, and then you do not have to put the mass protest signs in those territories. So that's like a different buffer, and it's very interesting, the asymmetric approach to the game. Continuing just on the board here, over on this side, these are the places where those purple factories can go for Poland and Czechoslovakia. Over on this side is one of the most important tracks, and that is the end of decade track, because the game is played over a maximum of 4 decades. And at the end of every decade, you're going to go through these steps in order to verify certain things. And then at the bottom here, we have a flight track. There are certain cards that when used and laid out here, they accumulate here. And if the Berlin Wall is not yet constructed, there's the potential for citizens to leave the east and head to the west. And this helps kind of figure that out and track that. And then for every level that you're on here, the east has to dismantle some of their infrastructure, or they have to impact their infrastructure in some way. So that's pretty much it for the board. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see how the whole thing looks. All right, and here you have a view of the entire board. See the top edge and the bottom edge right here. It's a nice small size for just an average table, but there's a lot of game packed into this, which is one of the cool things about it. So the game starts with 4 factories already on the board, and they're indicated by these sort of squiggly cities here. So in Hamburg, which Hamburg is a special city because it's actually part of either province, so there's some abilities that you can do there. And then here in Dortmund, and then one in Berlin, and one in Bitterfeld. And those are the setup cities for that. So here we'll take a closer look at the cards. As I say, the game is played over a maximum of 4 decades. And they have different years printed on here, the different periods of time. There are also 4 cards that are available to only the East, and they are special cards that only they can play, and they tend to have large effects on them. So when to play them is one of the strategy decisions to be made. So these are also available from one decade to the next. But just take a quick look here at some of the cards here in the first decade. Now, you'll notice one thing is that there are some that have red artwork up on top. Center this a little. If there is red artwork here, the event that's printed down here will benefit the East German side. If there's yellow printed on the image, then this will benefit, for the most part, the East. And if it's a combination of red and yellow, and also the type here in the description is in red just to kind of make it stand out from these two here, then it's a mix of the two. So the decision to play a card for its event versus other things, including its build value, which is this number here, that determination is informed by the color of the event itself. So that's one of the decisions to be made. Notice here on this one, if you use this card for its number value or build value, if you're the yellow player, you get 4 points available for this. If you're the red player, you only get 1, so that may affect what you do. So the other thing is that cards can be used also for placing for removing unrest and things like that, things that don't involve either the event or the sort of ops points, if you will, in this corner here. The iconography on it is fairly straightforward. Once you learn kind of what is going on, this is to add those blue unrest cubes. This is about dismantling things, so you can, build something on the west side, but dismantle something on the east side. But the little icon here indicates that the West gets to choose both of those. But then meanwhile, this benefits socialism. So on that socialism track that we were looking at on the board, it's going to move to the right, which only helps the East. And then there's some other things here involving secret police and things like that, some symbols there. But it's pretty straightforward. These arrows here, they just indicate what direction those little markers go. They have historical events on here, the 1953 uprising, land reform, the forced merger of KPD and SPD, monetary reform in the East, and so on. So you can see these are all first decade cards. This is when the Stasi is founded, and this is a card that once played, if it's played for the event by the East, they take this card, and then this card can be used to remove an unrest cube once per decade. So it's a powerful card because the Stasi is able to suppress some of that unrest that's building up on the board. So it's really quite interesting how the theme comes out in this game. It is very interesting. I've only sort of stepped through it to kind of learn, real basic parts of it. But it still remains to be seen what the strategy is. I'm looking forward to stepping through that and learning more about that. And then just to give you an idea, the Decade 1 special card is Russian tanks. So the Russian tanks will immediately, if played for its event, that's the only reason to play it, is played for its event. It doesn't actually have an ops value. You would remove 2 mass protests, 2 unrest, but the prestige goes down because in the world view, it's a little bit alarming to have tanks rolling down the streets. But socialism goes up. The other thing is that if the Berlin Wall is still not built, which this early in the game it's not, you have this flight risk here, which is something that is checked at the end of every decade. So again, you have to have a good reason to play this card, but it does a lot. You gain a little, you lose a little, but that's just one of the choices that you'll have to make as that side. So the last thing I'll just go over real quick on this overview video is a little bit about the end of decade checks, because this is the stuff that you really want to be aware of as you're playing moment to moment. So the more familiar with this that you become, the more better decisions you could be making. There's a marker here that is used to track each stage of the end of decade check, which by the way is triggered. There's a row of cards that are laid out, and as soon as the last card from the row is played, that triggers the last action, and then you do the end of decade check. Actually, you have 2 rounds of 2 half decades of cards laid out, and then after those 2 are done, that triggers the end of decade. If the wall is still not built, you have this token on this side, but as soon as the wall goes up due to a card effect, then you have this one, and then you look at things a little bit differently. But basically, this first one here means that you go and you review the data on the flight track, which we took a brief look at here. And as I mentioned before, if there are cards, as cards are played, they're laid out here, and this is sort of the discard pile down on this bottom edge, and you lay the cards down. And some of the cards are going to have the little fleeing citizen icon. So one of the things you'll check here is if you basically count up the number of symbols there are, you count out how many of the secret police cards that the East player has in effect, the maximum quality of life markers that are on one side, the minimum number on the other, and so on. There's some checks there. I'm not going to go into detail, but the end result is that you end up on a number, and both of these are 2, both of these are 3. So you end up here, and that means then that the East has to dismantle 3 build points, and that's what this is all about. Is people are leaving, and they're not there to maintain the infrastructure or the factories, and so what are you going to do about it? So that's what that is. The next end of decade check is this prestige item here, and that requires you to take a look at the prestige track, and whichever player has prestige, in this case it's the West. If it was over here in the red, it would be the East. Whoever has this marker in their possession, if you will, can execute the action that is beneath it or less. So in this case, the West can do this, that's the same, or nothing, I guess. So anyway, the further over this way you go, the more options you have of things that you can do. And then in the case of the East, it's in the other direction. So if prestige is in the East, they can remove unrest and build invest in a build point, or they can just remove unrest, or they can just do a build point. But obviously you would do both in this example. Here you have a few choices again of either adding unrest or dismantling, for example, dismantling build points on the other side. Next on the end of decade, we've got the Western currency check. The starting point for the Western currency, and this is of interest only to the East, is where this marker is on the track. So if you are on +2, then you've got +2 Western currency as a base or starting point. And then obviously the opposite is true if it goes negative. So you need Western currency in order to maintain the living standards, which again are represented by these cubes. You need $1, if you will, for each living standard cube you have on your side of the board. So one source of that is, as I say, this number, if it's in the positive. Now, every province has an export factory, and that is the factory that has the highest value. For every province where this value is at least equal to the worst Western output value, you get one Western currency. So for example, if this is the worst factory and you have 2 in this province here, you're going to get one Western currency to help support, say, for example, this living standard. So that's basically what you're doing, is you're just checking to see if you have enough Western currency to keep this up and running. If you fall short, then the players alternate dismantling things or running down factories. For each police power card that the East has, you have to dismantle one build point. So the Stasi card that we were looking at before has this icon on it. So you have to dismantle one build point of your choice because you've got that particular perk there. This check here is to make sure that you can hold your living standard. What you do is both players check all their provinces, and the number of living standards in a province cannot exceed the value of its export factory. And so, depending on how many of these you have and what the current factory levels are, you're going to do some tallying to make sure that you can maintain these living standards. Then you're going to check internally within your half of the country. You want to make sure that there's some equality there. It's an internal comparison of your living standards. So what you do is you compare all of your provinces with your own highest developed province. That's the one with the most living standards. So if you have one that has 2, you now have to compare this with all the other ones that have 1 or all the ones that have 0 in them. And every province with less receives unrest counters equal to the difference -1. So suddenly unrest is going to start cropping up because, for example, here, this province doesn't have any living standard and this one has 2. So the difference is 2 minus 1 is 1. So you're going to put 1 protest there. And that could very well be the protest that tips it over the edge and it becomes a mass protest, and that can impact what you're going to do in the next round. So that's what's going on with this internal check. This next marker here is the last one here that uses the living standard as part of its end of decade examination. And this is an opportunity to actually confront territories or attack territories, if you will, across this border here. Every province that borders your opponent's province, you have the opportunity to do a check and attack and compare living standards. And for the difference in living standards, you get to, you guessed it, add unrest markers. Of course, if there's socialists available, that'll get added instead. But again, the goal here is to try to tip things over such that protests start turning up because of the last check that's coming up here that we're getting to. So here's kind of a bit of a head-to-head that you get to do across this border, this entire border here. This next one here is if the East has police power cards and they haven't already used them, they have the opportunity to remove an unrest cube and load it onto that card. So that's just, if it hasn't already happened this decade, you get to do that here. This one here is you get to add or subtract socialist cubes based on where this is. And finally, the last check at the end of the decade is there any player that has 4 or more mass protests? If they do, they lose the game. So depending on how things play out during all these checks, there are situations where you could have protests that suddenly crop up that you didn't plan for, and that can end you the game. So that's one way to end the game. I mentioned earlier there's the success and failure of socialism as another way. If you get through all 4 decades and there's no definitive winner, then the East wins because they've toughed it out long enough to again be considered a victory for socialism. So that's what goes on there. There are a couple other details about the game. The way Berlin is managed. There is a special factory here where if there's a card that you play where you get nuclear power, there's a special factory that goes here. And I didn't really go much into how these external factories play into it. So there you have just a quick overview of the game. As I say, it's a lot of game in a little package. And hopefully you can secure a copy and give it a try sometime. In the meantime, thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you are a game designer or a game publisher and you have a game that is in any stage of production, and you would like a tutorial that's presented in this same style, please click on the link on the screen now or down in the description for more information about how I might be able to help make that video for you.